member states. So we're still waiting for the plans of Bulgaria, I think Bulgaria and Romania, but all 25 others are in. The Commission has given its approval to 18 of those plans, and the Council, the ministers, have signed off on 12 of them last week, and we expect a further 4 plans to be approved by the end of July, and there's 2 further plans which we expect to be adopted probably in the first week of September. So really, the instrument is fully operational and up and running. The Commission has already gone to the financial markets 3 times. We have raised 45 billion euros. And so we will be in a position to make payments, the 13% pre-allocation, starting in the coming days. So for Spain, that will be 9 billion euros out of a total grant allocation of 69.5 billion euros. So the instrument is fully up and running. Now, why is it, as I mentioned, a lever for change and potentially a game changer? I'm going to mention 6 reasons. Some are obvious and some are maybe less obvious. The obvious one is something, Alicia, you mentioned, is just in terms of the scale of solidarity, of European solidarity in the face of an economic shock. We have had instruments in the past to help countries facing economic difficulties. For example, natural disasters, but the amounts of money involved is very small. During the global financial crisis, we developed instruments to support countries facing economic difficulties, but these were in the form of loans, which have to be repaid. I mean, this instrument involves very, very large fiscal transfers. Now, as a share of GDP for the EU, the grants are about 3%, but for countries like Spain, which are amongst the biggest beneficiaries, it's closer to 6%. Greece, it's 9%. Croatia, it's 12% of GDP. I mean, these are very, very big macro levels of solidarity, and that's something we just simply haven't had before. So the second element I want to underline is this really marks a change in let's say the consensus on the role of fiscal policy, and I mean centralized fiscal policy in supporting our economies in the face of economic shock. This is a very, very big change compared to what happened in response to the global financial crisis, where fiscal policy very, very quickly was tightened. And here I think there's a recognition that fiscal policy needs to be much, much more accommodative, much, much more supportive to help our economies in the face of these very big economic difficulties. It also is important in recognizing the need for coordination between monetary policy, which has been very accommodative, and fiscal policy. And this recognition of the positive interactions between fiscal and monetary policy is much, much more explicit than it was before. So this is not a permanent instrument, but it is a recognition that there are occasions when centralized fiscal capacity is necessary, especially in our monetary union, in the face of certain types of economic shocks. And the third reason I want to mention is all of this is being financed through loans or bonds, which the European Commission is issuing on financial markets. Now, the Commission in the past has borrowed money, but we've never been in a position to run large deficits at the EU budget level. And so we will be issuing bonds of 750 billion euros. And so this is going to this will mean that the Commission becomes a major issuer of safe euro-denominated safe assets. And that's something which has been a gap in our financial, in the financial sphere for some time. So I think the solidarity, a big paradigm shift in an understanding on the role of fiscal policy, and the European Commission being a major player in the terms of issuance of safe markets, these are very important levers for change and mark an important step forward in European integration. Now, I'd like to turn to maybe 3 more, maybe slightly less obvious reasons why this is important. So the first I want to say is that for the first time, the Recovery and Resilience Facility it combines reforms and investments, okay? So in the past, we have dealt with reforms through the European semester. We have had instruments like the structural funds, which have been able to provide financial support for investments, but we've never had an instrument which brings both reforms and investments together. And that, you know, that changes the nature of our economic dialogue with member states. The fact that we can, you know, provide financial support or support investment, it provides a much stronger financial incentives for member states to pursue difficult structural reforms. It also means that, you know, very often for difficult structural reforms, the challenge is coping with the transitional costs or compensating the losers of reforms. And so, you know, we now have an instrument which, you know, can make it much easier to pursue and help member states in you know, what can be difficult reform processes. It also means that we can include investments in, let's say, the accompanying measures which are necessary to make a success of key policies. Like, for example, what we see in the recovery facility on investments in skills. So really, the combining reforms and investments in one instrument is an important change. The second, I mean, a further reason why it's a very different instrument is it's a performance-based instrument. So what this means is that the Commission will be releasing financial aid in disbursements once member states complete specific milestones or targets, key stepping stones when it comes to reforms and investments. And this is a very, very different instrument and a very different approach compared to, say, the structural funds, where the Commission provides financial support when member states show us evidence of the incurred costs, the invoices which they have been delivered. So, you know, all that matters now is the completion of these milestones and targets. So Spain has made commitments to, I don't know, renovate 500,000 homes so they're more energy efficient. As long as Spain demonstrates that they have met those targets, the Commission will release the financial aid. And that is potentially a very different way of doing business. And it could potentially, you know, be much, you know, properly implemented. This could be much less bureaucratic, much more outcome oriented than the types of instruments we've had in the past. The final point and the final reason why I think it's a very different instrument and potentially a game changer is that the Recovery and Resilience Facility runs through the budget of the EU, okay? Now, why is that different and why is that important? Because if you look back at the global financial crisis, what the Euro area did was we created financial support instruments that were intergovernmental in nature, okay? They did not run through the European budget, okay? And the fact that they run through this instrument runs through the European budget has very big implications. The first implication is it gives a much stronger role to the European Commission. Okay, if you look at the financial support instruments with the ESM, it's not only the Commission, it's the ECB, it's the European Stability Mechanism. Here, the Commission is front and center of the implementation. The second important reason why going through the budget is important is it gives a much stronger role to the European Parliament in terms of financial oversight. Much stronger compared to its involvement in let's say, the ESM type instruments. And the final reason it's important is it means that all of the requirements of the financial regulation apply. So all of the requirements to protect the financial instruments of the interests of the Union have to be respected. So, and this then is relevant when it comes to all of the discussions we're seeing now, engagement on avoiding fraud, corruption, ensuring protection of the rule of law in order to protect the financial interests of the Union. So again, those are three additional reasons why it's a very different instrument compared to what we've had before and could indeed be a game changer. I think I'll stop here so I can leave time for questions and answers. Yep. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you give some clues, very interesting clues, and some you left some things for the debate, no? Because the large deficit as acceptance is a political decision, so the decision can change. And what about the audit, about the reforms? Who will be the auditor? No. Well, we can discuss that in our next session. of Q&A. Vamos ahora con Luis Caricano. Bueno, pues todo tuyo, Luis.
Muchas gracias, Alicia. Es un placer estar aquí con vosotros y con Manuel de la Rocha y Técnico Estelo. Estoy de acuerdo con Declan en que el momento es verdaderamente, no tiene ningún precedente, que es un nivel de solidaridad novedoso en la Unión Europea, que es un instrumento que genera un activo seguro que no teníamos en el pasado, que es un instrumento que genera una capacidad de coordinación de política económica y de la macro stance, de la posición macro de la Unión, que no tenía precedentes y que permite que tengamos una recuperación, digamos, armónica en Europa y nos da una oportunidad de hacer una serie de cambios. Entonces, comparto mucho de lo positivo que ha dicho. El año pasado muchos, y bueno, pues Manuel Arrocha y yo, por ejemplo, hablamos justo ahora mismo, hace un año seguramente, de las posibilidades de este instrumento, me recuerdo y tal, y muchos pensamos que era un momento quizás, podría ser un momento hamiltoniano, ¿no? Hemos usado esta expresión en muchos contextos para apuntar a la idea
of a one-off. There's a big shock, and little by little we will eliminate and digest it. Commitments of I will give you 1,000 euros now, but never again, and this might change. If in the year 28 we have another crisis and this instrument exists, why not having a unified response once again? But I believe there is a big but to provide continuity, and that is the fact that things go well. Of course, there's lots of money involved. We will be expending a great amount of money. The amounts that Declan mentioned that are enormous, with 6% of its GDP for Spain. And the countries that haven't been in favor of this kind of transfers will want for this money to be spent adequately. So we are under observation, and we must make sure that in Italia, Poland, Spain, those countries that are receiving most money, others like also Greece and Croatia, we need to demonstrate that we spend it adequately. If not, there won't be any continuity. So we are in a situation of an exam situation. Let's see what happens. But we need to demonstrate that we do this adequately. The second requirement is governance. Right now, we have two authorities, the Commission and the Council, that will be passing and will be passing these plans, as well as the disbursements that are approved or passed by the Commission. But the Council does have a tool to stop it if they don't think things are being done adequately, even though this is not really clear. They're still considering this. But in fact, those in charge will be the Commission. And we can probably speak about this further later on with Declan. If there's something that you don't understand, please let me know, because then I will say it in English for you, Declan. I believe the Commission, and I'm talking about governance, has done a friendly and nice work with the governments, but they haven't at all demonstrated the demand level that this kind of expenditure requires. In fact, you look and see that all the grades that they've all received is the same one. They've all received an A, except for the cost estimates where they received a B. I'm a professor, and I've been so for many years, and I've been giving grades for a long time. When a DA is asked to correct the exam, and everyone receives an A in all questions, and except for one where everyone receives or gets a B, you see that they haven't spent much time correcting those exams, because it is impossible for everyone to get exactly the same grade. On the other hand, the Council, when we've been speaking about this with them, when we've asked them, the Council, about how they see things and what their impression is, what they've clearly said is that this is a problem of the Commission, that they don't have the resources to read 3,000-page plans, and that they depend on the Commission. So the Council will be de facto delegating in the Commission, and the Commission maybe fears somehow the Council. So in this second problem regarding governance is that there's no financial ministry. There's a treasury, there's Mr. Ham, who is issuing debt, but without a ministry that is able to coordinate these economic issues and to make sure that there's a compliance with the plans, I don't know if there's the political nor technical capacity to make sure that there is compliance. And I hope I'm wrong in this. This is a but I really hope that I'm wrong. The Parliament said European money for European priorities, and I really hope the Commission is able to make sure that this is complied with. Or the third limitation, the first one is continuity, the second one is governance by the Commission, and the third are own resources. The Parliament, from the starting point, was very aware that having the capacity of issuing debt, but not having the capacity of this debt being paid, of getting the money to pay for the expenses and having the own resources, you were limiting yourself. Imagine the pluriannual financial framework when we have to give back money and the states say, I won't be giving you more. We don't have our own resources, and what we're having is that instead of growing in perimeter, we will decrease. We will have to decrease to be able to face this debt, and that would be a catastrophe. To make the states pay for money is not something that I see possible. The only alternative is the Hamilton alternative. I have this debt, but I have the capacity of taxing. And here we have three ideas. One would be plastic cuts. The other one would be the LTS transmission and the digital levy. This digital levy, the Commission says, well, we've promised that there's going to be a digital levy, but in the OECD, they're going to now agree on a minimum tax at a global level. So let's wait and see what they see. Of course, there's a great opportunity, but on the other hand, we have to look into this. And then the mechanism that is very limited is not something we can do. The plastics task is also quite small. That will become smaller. So my third concern is this Hamiltonian moment in which Europe has an instrument without having the capacity of getting the income necessary to be able to face that payment or the debt, which could be a step back. So these are three issues which are continuity, governance of the instrument, and own resources as necessary elements so that this big project, and I'm an enthusiastic. I'm very happy of the money that Spain is going to be receiving these days, and I believe it is wonderful that we do so, but I think there's these three buts to confirm continuity. Thank you. Thank you, Luis. As I said before, Luis Garicano had worked and had written many papers regarding this issue. And now we have the opportunity of listening to the person that is behind the app, Mr. Manuel de la Rocha. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the university for having invited me. It's a great pleasure being here and sharing with you this topic. Many of the things that have been said have been repeated, but I will insist on this topic from a different angle. And I will mention the Spanish plan most particularly. First of all, I would like to shed a light on how Europe looks at this recovery plan, comparing it with past plans. I think it is a part of the questions raised. There is, I think, a fact, which is with this recovery plan, Spain is going to set aside austerity and shows that Spain has learned the lessons of the past and put forward a plan looking at the future and showing solidarity. This wasn't clear. It could have been different, but in this case, I think that the negotiations enabled Europe to give a different response, not only with the recovery plan, but with other values, as the early suspensions of the fiscal law, having a fiscal policy which has reached a wide consensus. So with promotion of investment, so we are suspending the fiscal laws, and this European Bank is going to react swiftly, injecting liquidity. So we also have a new framework that is supporting this economy. And lastly, we have this recovery fund with solidarity look at the future. But I would like, nevertheless, to talk about what the negotiations of this recovery plan. It represents a huge bargain between the North and the South, between the countries of the North and the South that needed, the country of the South that needed this money. The countries that are the richer countries, or maybe in this case that has suffered less the pandemic, are going to provide money through transfers in exchange of reforms. This is a huge bargain that wanted to be reached in the past and that has come with this pandemic. The countries of the League had resisted to this bargaining, but now they are ready to give money in exchange of the fact that those countries who need this money have to spend it in the due way. But I would like to say, accordingly with what Declan has mentioned, this is going to be a great event. It is a leap forward as the creation of the internal market, and it's going to be the three great event of the story: the single market and the euro, because it is a way of bringing about money, which is this big amount of money is going to be put forward, and a great amount of that is going to be there to fund the different national plans of the countries. But also it is important to mention the role of the European Commission, because throughout many years, when there was a dispute between the Council and the Commission and the European Council, that is, it seems, the intergovernmental approach, combining the discussions of the biggest country facing the other countries, where the common institutions like the Commission that are going to defend the common interests should be reinforced. This fund clearly reinforced the European Commission, which is the institution defending the European interest and not only the sum of the national interest. It is very interesting to listen to Luis saying that the Commission has not been so demanding. I don't know if it has been with other countries, but in Spain, Declan, we have been gone through 10 months of negotiations, intense negotiation, and I think the Commission is demanding. But I can say something regarding the past crisis. Before, there was an imposition to the countries that needed the money, and they had to leave aside certain things that have been rescues, and for example in Greece, but in this case the negotiation has been genuine. So there was a basis in the regulation that established a certain criteria to be met by the countries, and from then onwards the intense debate of the European Commission, and the standpoint of the European Commission wasn't to impose to another member state what I consider, but I will have to discuss with them what I consider as positive as a reform. And once I get to what this country is going to do, I will ensure its fulfillment. So the result is, if you don't like it, you won't do it, but you will take the money. And this has been the case in other programs of the past. But in this case, the Commission says, I will accompany you, but I would like a certain number of commitments on your behalf. Okay. The third major element that has been mentioned by Declan is that this is done through the European budget. It wasn't clear because we intensely discussed how it was going to be. There were many proposals of big countries wanted it to have a financial instrument using the rescue fund, and we wanted to reinforce the European budget. Is small, but it is going to open the door to the case of the our own funds. Our own funds have shown that we need more ambition to have our own funds, and what we are going to explore, for example, the digital levy, the plastic tax. It's not a European tax, it's just a certain number of parameters, but we are going to pay it through the budget. But also we have these different European taxes which open at the door to a certain number of budgets in the future that would be more robust with all these elements. As Luis has stated, although this is in theory, and it is stated on all the documents that the reality won't be repeated. But if we look back, once we step forward, it is difficult to go back, and it has been very difficult to negotiate. So it is going to be an instrument that is going to be functioning for 6 years, but if it works, I'm sure it will set down a certain number of criteria. So we will have to coordinate financial politics with an instrument which is going to be very difficult to erase. And I would like to mention also the SURE instrument to protect the unemployed. It is a one-off. It was done once, but it is an instrument that is going to be an employment mechanism and insurance mechanism. So I also wanted to mention another element. But before that, the international role of the euro. With all these debt and these assets, this is going to reinforce the international role of the euro as a reserved currency. That is going to create an hybrid market of euro bonds, and it's going to be very difficult in a few years when we leave the crisis aside. It's going to be replaced because the strength of the euro is going to be based on this euro asset. A lot of institutions are going to buy these assets, and this is going to be there in the future as well. Another major aspect of these plans is that they are reinforcing the strategic autonomy of the European Union. In a world with large geopolitical powers that are in their own battles, these plans are going to foster European projects that are going to reinforce this strategic autonomy, a greater autonomy in a certain number of value chain and in the raw materials and essential goods. Of course, this is not said so much in the media, but we will see that when we see European projects of common interest or projects among different countries that have been fostered by the European Commission, we will then see the importance of the integration of these projects. And last but not least, I think this is a game changer. And this is going to be one of the major milestones of the European Union, and a great number of these issues and the governance that has been created is there to stay. And I would like to recall the great commitment between the north and the northern countries and the southern countries. This was a theory that was fostered by some countries and not by others, but this balance is quite fragile, and we will have to reinforce it between the countries that receive the money and those who are giving the money in exchange of reforms and having a governance that is going to be there to stay. So this is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Manuel. There are some questions on the table, and but you have given us a few hints. I didn't realize the reinforcing the role of the euro and the euro bonds market to take on board, to talk about the disappearance of the euro is going to be more difficult, and maybe use this instrument will be used to reinforce the strategic autonomy of the European Commission. This is one of the key issues that we have learned. I've left for the end the Councillor, the Minister of Economy of Cantabria. I'm sure that she will tell us what are the expectations of the regional governors and how they can get the most of this instrument so important for the European Commission. Thank you very much and good morning. I would like to say hello to the High Representative of the High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security, and also to say hello to Mrs. Narbona. And I would like to say hello to Declan Costello and Luis de la Rocha. And I would say that when the European Council passed 1 year ago, 21st of July 2020, the Next Generation EU funds, the Commission not only was just setting a milestone as the great instrument or lever for change. This action went beyond its representation to lay the basis of a new economic model, a model that is betting on the digital transformation and the green economy as major game changer. Next Generation EU has enabled us to give a harmonized response to one of the worst economic and social crises of our history. Its aim is to get to a post-COVID Europe more ecological, more digital, and above all, more resilient to changes and challenges of the future. As you might know, as a fruit of the negotiations of the government of President Sanchez, Spain will have access to 140 billion of euros, and 70,000 billions will be in the form of transfers. Our roadmap is in the national plan of Spain, and under that, the different regions and autonomous community, we have implemented those projects that from our standpoints meet these, the requirements of this plan. Last August, August 2020, with the aim of identifying these projects, these ideas, Cantabria started a consultation process where both the different ministries of the autonomous government, local bodies, enterprises, and representative of the private life. This campaign is a fruit of this study, and it is a live document that takes on board 100 initiatives that should be funded. All these initiatives are going to be articulated according to the axes that have been set by Europe. It is possible to be translated into figures. 20% are going to be meeting the digital transformation, the rest in investments and of the projects that have been presented, and they have to be green projects. They have to meet the objectives of the climate change actions. This document and the job made has enabled us to meet the different campaigns that have been organized by the Spanish government to be able to participate in the different MTs that have been on the table throughout this time. So for this not to stay only on the paper, I just will mention a certain number of proposals that have been implemented in the digital transformation sphere and green economy. They're not the only one, but they are the ones that can be the most representative. As regards the digital transformation in the sphere of the reactive program in the Next Generation EU, a great amount of the funds received have been aimed at supporting the digital transformation of Cantabria, most particularly those in the primary and secondary school, because if something has been said by the pandemic is the great need of reinforcing the digital capacities of the educational sphere. This has been very much important also in the rural areas, and also in the recuperation and resilience context. Betting on the digital transformation is very much present in the government to foster the local and regional administration. We are fully aware of the fact that we have to invest on tools that will make more fluid the relationship with the citizenship. And thanks to this program, Cantabria, our community, has the possibility to have a modern, flexible administration and nearer to its population. And this bet on the digital transformation of the production system wouldn't be fulfilled without a certain number of requirements giving way to this transition. So with the Cantabrian University and in collaboration with other international institutions, we are drafting a certain number of pedagogical instruments. This, as the hub of Comillas, this will enable us to create an ecosystem and helping us to have Cantabria as a reference in this field. And to close the loop in the sphere of the digital transformation, I mentioned the cultural sector and the creative industries. The culture secretary is promoting a certain number of initiatives that are closely linked to the management of our local heritage. We have the great chance to have 10 caves that are declared by the UNESCO protected. Those who are the Altamira cave is very well known, and others that are less known but are all precious. I invite you to visit them. It is a prehistoric heritage that we want to safeguard and protect for the next generation, and therefore we have gathered our effort to have the competitivity pole of the prehistoric period of Cantabria. This was created to protect the richness of our prehistoric heritage of our community, but also because we are very much interested in implementing a policy surrounding the cultural, tourism, education, and research. All that accompanied by the creation of new digital tools that will enable us to enlarge these resources and also to disseminate the scientific results. Nevertheless, at the center of this competitive pole, this center will be in Santander, in the Museum of Prehistoric Art in Cantabria, the MUPAC, as we know it here. But the great dynamism of this project will be expanded to the whole community of Cantabria, and its influence and repercussion will be present in other cities, and we will establish a direct link with another pole of the prehistoric art, as the one of Lascaux in France and the Valley of Coa in Portugal. We also want to go towards a greener region, and all this project wouldn't have a sense if they wouldn't be presented in a sustainable way to bet on the climate change and promote the green economy. In a region as Cantabria, with a great presence of green areas and natural spaces, this is fundamental. A great number of these companies, of the companies working here, will have to face an industrial transition towards greener models and toward more sustainable model at short and medium term. This sector represents 23% of the GDP of Cantabria, so it is the greatest challenge. A lot of these companies have asked for assessment to have the best formula to have this get hold of these investments, but the work carried out by our community has enabled this industrial fabric to better look at the sustainable plans. On top of that, on top of the counseling, of course, our ministry has launched a pioneer project at European level to promote the evolution of the Besaya Basin towards an economic model low in carbon. The project is Besaya is deliberating in Europe. It is a dialogue between citizens and companies and industries that is supported by the OECD. The OECD. So this is to invest in the European funds. The project that is reaching its end is fostering a certain number of initiatives that will be considered both for the NRER, but also the European funds that are being articulated. In general terms, during the next month, we will also gather an important amount of money to fund actions that will transform our environment and to make it greener and more sustainable. To end, as mentioned beforehand, we are at a great moment, full of projects, but I wouldn't like to close my talk without mentioning an aspect which is fundamental. It is of no help having a lot of funding if it's not well managed. So the Cantabrian government and the Ministry of Economy and Treasury, we have centered our efforts to be prepared. We have more staff, and we have regulations that are going to ease up this process and avoiding bottlenecks. The actions like this one are the ones that enable us to meet the further program 1420 and be considered by Europe as an excellence region in management. We are fully aware that it is a great challenge, but I can tell you that from this region we are fully prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Regional Minister. Thank you. We hope all these projects you've just mentioned become a reality in a few years. And these plans give me the option of asking a few questions, some personal doubts I have. Who is going to audit the compliance of these reforms? The reforms in the Spanish case. Who is going to assess that they are complied with? And what happens if they're not put in place? Because if amongst the reforms, for example, we have the reforms of the pension system, and correct me, Manuel, if we don't do this before the end of the year, if this reform is not put in place in the deadline that we have, what will happen then? That is one of my questions. And another question is, what is happening with the fiscal rules? They've been suspended for now, but as I mentioned before, this has been a political decision that might change. The countries in the north, as Manuel mentioned, have learned after what happened in the financial crisis. They've decided that this couldn't be the behavior, that fiscal policy needed to contribute in a positive manner. But we have elections in Germany in September. In spring 2022, there will be elections in France. Is there a risk of this political decision changing? These are my two first questions to kick off the discussion. And maybe we can start with you, Manuel. Yes, I will be very pleased, Alicia. Thank you. Who audits or controls the compliance? I believe it's quite clear. It's the European Commission. Because the Commission has to validate, and there's a few articles explaining this clearly. So the responsibilities of the Commission then are brought to the Financial Committee once they are satisfied with the compliance with the objectives, and then this has to be validated by the member states and this committee. And in this second stage is where we could activate, if a member state had any doubts, what is called the emergency brake, that it was so difficult to negotiate during the Council in July, where a country could stop or break a payment and bring it before the Council for a political discussion. But in fact, then it will come back. So it would be just a political discussion and then would go back to the Financial Committee. And what happens if we don't comply? In fact, this is something we've been discussing during these days with the Commission, and I believe Spain has been progressing more than others because we have been one of the first countries to have our plan approved. This automatically means that there's this pre-funding, there's 13%, which is around 9 billion. But we've also negotiated, as you know, that our payments will be accelerated. We have a payment front-loaded calendar where around 55 billion will be disbursed in the first 3 years, and during this first year, beyond this 9 billion, there's 10 billion for compliance of the objectives that have been achieved throughout this year. We are now, in fact, negotiating the format, and the Commission is quite demanding regarding verification of compliance with milestones and objectives, which are mainly reforms. The main question is what happens when you don't comply 100% with all the objectives and you've complied with a high level of them. As there's no precedent, maybe Declan could explain how he sees this. But the regulation is quite ambiguous because it says that the Commission carries out a global assessment of the compliance, and according to this assessment or evaluation, they decide. And also, the regulation opens the door to potential partial payments, or if when you have to make the petition for disbursement, you can negotiate a delay. But if you complied in a 90%, I believe that there the regulation leaves an open space so there can be a global assessment, including a partial payment. But maybe Declan has more information on how the Commission sees this according to the regulation. And the last thing that has to do with the fiscal policy. Regarding what the government of Spain is doing, our priority is the consolidation of recovery and growth. This is what concerns us right now. So we believe that this would be the priority, that we consolidate growth not only to recover the previous levels, but the trajectory of growth and where it would set us if we haven't had this pandemic. That is the priority. Having said this, we believe that having a discussion right now on the fiscal rules is something that is distracting us from the priority, which is consolidating growth. Having said this, once we reach levels that are close and to previous ones, then at some point we should reestablish the fiscal rules. But we believe it's the moment of making the most of these new fiscal rules to reform the fiscal rules, which was a previous discussion, which are the stable pact, which are difficult to understand and estimate, and therefore there are difficulties in implementations when we talk about structural deficit. We believe we need to simplify them, and whenever we need to introduce new rules, to re-establish the fiscal rules and make sure that we have new rules that are simpler, easier to understand for citizens, and that allow us to always have a more anti-cyclical way of working. Thank you. Declan?
If not all of the milestones and targets are completed. I mean, essentially, we've got three options if member states don't fully comply. Either we simply don't make a disbursement and we wait until everything is done. We, in some cases, could ask a member state, please revise your plan, send a new plan. If you can't do what you originally wanted to do, send in a new plan. It's very heavy. Or we make a partial disbursement. And indeed, the regulation allows discretion to the Commission on how much. And we think this is very, very important, because what we see is a risk that member states would have an incentive to complete the easy tasks, the investments, the spending. But when it comes to the reform, which doesn't cost any money, it doesn't cost any money to change the law on pensions or modify the law on labor markets, member states would avoid the difficult stuff. And so we need to have a margin for discretion to take account of the significance of these measures. So this is how it would work. But I think so. There's, if member states don't complete the key reforms, there's the short-term issue on whether the disbursement will go ahead partially or not at all. But there's the longer-term implication, which is what Luis mentioned about whether, if this instrument is really to be a permanent, is to be have sustained lasting change and maybe to lead to something permanent, it has to deliver on this reform component. I mean, and I would have to say it's particularly important for large euro area countries with high levels of deficits and debt to deliver on the reforms. The rules, it's the same rules for every country. But I think in economic terms, and probably in political terms, the real key is Italy and Spain. And either Italy and Spain deliver on the reforms, deliver the growth needed to generate a recovery, or it will be very difficult to see how the new consensus, which has been forged between North and South, can be sustained, and we would end up with some sort of able to have a discussion on making this a permanent instrument. Then turning to the fiscal rules, okay, so the general escape clause of the Stability Pact is in place, which means member states do not have to meet the normal budget targets. Now, what the Commission has said is, we think this should remain in place not only this year, 21, but also 22. And we expect the fiscal rules to come back into force in 2023, because that's when we expect our economies to have recovered in terms of the impact of COVID. We issued an economic forecast about 2 weeks ago, and that forecast suggests that 23 indeed is the moment to restore the functioning of the Stability and Growth Pact. The question then is, should we proceed in advance of that with the revision of the fiscal framework and the governance framework? Now, the debate on that was suspended because of COVID. Our expectation is that debate will restart sometime in autumn. Now, the question is, will the consensus which exists on the role of fiscal policy during COVID, will that be extended as we go towards as we reopen the debate on the future? Here, I think to some extent, the COVID has underlined a number of points. It has underlined, as Manuel said, our rules are simply too complicated. And in particular, the rules we have regarding the level of debt are probably close to being unworkable now, given the impact of the crisis on the level of debt level. So something will have to be adjusted there. Otherwise, if we try to mechanically apply the existing rules, you would end up with a pace of fiscal consolidation which would not be economically viable. The second thing which COVID has maybe underlined is the importance of giving the right incentives to sustain public investment, which we need to do going forward, also if we're going to finance the climate and digital transition. So I think it's made a push in that direction. But fundamentally, we will have to come back to a position of sustainable public finances. Our deficits do need to be brought back to a sustainable trajectory. We can discuss what is the best rule to achieve that, what is the appropriate pace of fiscal consolidation, but we do need to come back to having a sustainable, credible fiscal path. And this is probably going to be this will be a difficult issue for Spain, because unfortunately Spain entered the COVID crisis with a rather weak fiscal position. The underlying deficit was close to 3% of GDP. Now, at some stage, it does need to be brought onto a sustainable trajectory. So bottom line is, I expect a debate on the fiscal rules to recommence in autumn. We expect the general escape clause to be lifted in 2023. The question is, can we come to a consensus around what comes next before the general escape clause is lifted in 2023? Thank you.
So the debate is open, and the discussions will be vivid, in future months. Luis, tu turno.
Gracias. Sí, gracias. No doy las gracias, además nos olvidamos porque no vemos en la pantalla a Josep Borrell, alto representante, por la invitación. Y le prometo que el año que viene, si lo hay, en persona, ya sin COVID.
So I would like to thank also the regional ministry from Cantabria, which I forgot to do so before. I have 3 comments to the 2 questions, and then I have my own comment that has to do with learning and the lessons we've learned from the previous crisis. I believe that it is true that austerity after the euro crisis was erroneous and excessive. I said so at that point in time, and I published different documents saying so in 2011 and 2012. But I don't share that the reforms were not going in the right direction, and I believe this has been something that hasn't been learned adequately, that they believe that they cannot impose sanctions. If you look to Portugal, that has a healthy position with growth, or Greece, that has forgotten the populism and is going through a good path. Spain only had one thing where we were intervened, that was the financial rescue that depolitized the savings banking system, which was a problem for our economy, and that was successful and that it worked. So the reforms demanded or even imposed by Europe worked. And Europe has this role. We are a union, we have one same way of working, we have economies that are not sustainable or that do not have the capacity of maintaining its trajectory, because sometimes there's this demographic power games. And for us, sometimes in Spain, it's very difficult to obtain this sustainability, for example, for the pension systems, because it's very easy to promise things that never happen later on. So the Commission has to be very demanding And I believe they have been so, and I hope they continue to be so. Secondly, regarding your question, what happens with this partial disbursements or payments? And yes, I agree with what has been said, because there is a discretion, as Declan said, for the Commission, so we don't know what they will be doing. And I will be giving an example. The pension reform is one of the 43 milestones that have to be achieved in the second semester of 2022 to receive the fourth payment, 11 billion. So 11.5 billion with these 43 milestones. What happens if we comply with 42 but we haven't done the pension reform? Yes, nothing happens, everything's blocked, and Europe sees that this hasn't happened. What the rules say is very interesting. It says being informed, the reform being enforced. So we go to the law, or there's changes in reforms being enforced, but it doesn't talk about the content. For example, the university reform. The government wants a cosmetic reform that really does nothing. But there will be a law that will be informed that says nothing, but we only want it to be enforced. So then we approve the payment. So there the Commission has a problem that is not included in the rules, and that is, what if we formally or cosmetically comply with those objective of 43 reforms, but in terms of content it does nothing. There is a working document of the Commission that says that there should be several assessments and so on and so forth. But what happens if this is not happening? We don't know. It's 11.5 billion. We get less money. You say, well, maybe we do a bit less. If they tell us that we get nothing, then we will have to see what we do. So it is a very difficult political and technical decision for the Commission, because the rule only talks about being enforced. Being enforced what? We don't talk about the content there. Third remark has to do with your question, and I also share what Declan has said. I believe, and as Declan said, and this is the headline of the session, and I think he was right, so fiscal sustainability on the medium and long term of Spain and Italy, and how serious these two countries are, is going to decide if this is a success or not. It is crucial. There are two countries that are more important or relevant regarding this, and fiscally there's an opportunity to improve, which is the following. All countries, all MPs, all members of the council agree in it not working. Those in the north, because believe that those in the south are just doing whatever they want, because countries in the north believe that those in the south are not doing enough, and those in the south believing that those from the north are interfering too much in their decisions. So there should be a system that is more transparent and clear, and that makes more financial sense. Is absolutely necessary to reestablish and eliminate the suspension in the year 23. So we will go through a very complex moment. I don't tell anyone or say that we should propose something that is feasible. We're working in the darkness, let's say. There's an idea of a fiscal stability board that has always been making proposals, which is an expenditure rule that is linked to the Maastricht objectives that are quite crazy, seen from nowadays 60% debt when you are in 130. It seems to be non-feasible. But those objectives are there, and they're not going to change. The way in which we get there is what needs to change, and there is a proposal on the table. So we are trying to guarantee something that makes sense. We won't be doing it in another way if it's not possible. Thank you, Luis. I would like to open the floor in the room. I don't know if there is a microphone. Cristina Narbona. I don't know if it's possible to move the camera so that we can see whoever is speaking. Good morning, Mr. Garicano. Thank you. I have a doubt. In all these issues that you mentioned regarding the demands to southern countries, if not, we won't be receiving the money. Protestant countries have that vision that you mentioned of the South wasting money. Have they talked about the reform and control of the autonomies in Spain, which are famous for the waste of money without taking into account the ideology? Have they talked about any control measures for the autonomous regions in Spain? Thank you. Alicia, can I answer? Yes, you can answer this question. I think that's more dynamic if we work in this manner. No, northern countries don't care about what is the mechanism that makes this sustainable. I don't believe there is a special concern for this model. There are federal states, like in Germany, that are similar to the Spanish system. And no, and maybe I didn't said this, or I didn't say that the money is not going to come or not going to be received. All this is on the table. I really don't know what the degree of demand of the Commission is going to be. There's two steps, two separate steps. One, the plan, and this recovery plan has to be assessed according to the compliance with the plan. This second step, and this is the next 3 years, like Mr. De La Rocha said, the money is going to be received quite soon. And then something else is on the medium and long term are the rules, and we have an amendment that is introduced at the end of Mr. Zapatero's presidency. We have rules that say that you need to establish a budgetary discipline. How are these rules going to be modified on the long term? Because I believe we all understand that they are not working properly. These are two separate problems, but the answers could be different. I don't believe there's going to be a direct connection, even though there could be a political connection, because if we are wasting our money, then this cannot be so. But there's no connection from the formal standpoint. Good morning, Luis. It's a pleasure to listen to you. If I understood correctly, you said that the reforms that were demanded by the European Commission in the previous financial crisis, what we call austerity rules, have worked quite well, or at least that's what I understood. You mentioned Greece, Portugal. In the case of Spain, and there we have the figures since 2008 moving forward in Spain, there has been a great increase of inequality. There has been a great increase of precariousness in the labor market, mainly the jobs of the young men, and also poverty has increased, mainly children's poverty, and this was just before COVID that also manifested the devastating effects that the cuts in budgets for basic health services, public education had produced as a result of prioritizing that approach of austerity that somehow made all reforms go in the same direction, and that is complying with the fiscal objectives at the cost of an increase in inequality, precariousness, and poverty, and weakening the welfare state. So I fully disagree with what you've said, if this is what you meant. And on the other hand, I believe that international bodies, International Monetary Fund, OECD, for some time now, have been reviewing this paradigm, the paradigm of austerity, which has been now substituted with more inclusive paradigms, and mainly reviewing the kind of growth, of economic growth, generates more positive effects for all citizens and not only for some on the medium-long term. In fact, the Spanish National Plan has amongst its priorities that of improving social and territorial cohesion in our country, and in a great measure due to the austerity measures that were implemented. Is quite a dramatic situation, mainly for young people. So I would like to ask you about this comment. Maybe I understood it in one way, or in a more strict way than what you're saying. Of course, I'm not going to defend that a country just has to increase debt and deficit with no control. But in fact, to do so, the European Commission is going to survey what we're doing. So as you said, when we talked about reform, the term reform has become something that has been ideologized. When we talk about the pensions reform, I believe future pensioners are afraid because they believe that reforming the pension system will seem that the pension of the future will be less fair, less adjusted to the purchasing capacity, when you perfectly know that there are several possibilities regarding the reform of the pensions, and that there is a basic agreement in the Toledo Pact so that we can make sure that the pensions are in accordance to cost of life, and that we need to find funding that makes this system sustainable. But when we use the term reform, many, and not without reason, are afraid or feel fear. So I would like to know what your comment is regarding this. Thank you. Thank you, Cristina. I don't see you that well, but I believe it was Cristina. Well, trying to differentiate the following. This is what I would say. In Spain, I only was mentioning in the Memorandum of Understanding, in the MO, which is with the recovery or the rescue of Spain, the financial reform. And that was a reform. When I speak out about reform, I'm not speaking about austerity. I think that this is what happened in the 11th and 12th. I wasn't in favor of the fiscal measures that were put in place, and what we were doing is that we were cutting public budget, and I didn't agree with that, and I continue to be in disagreement. So this is wasn't what I was defending. What I defend is that we need reforms. So we need to separate, because when all this happened, there was a totem revolution with saying that austerity policies and reforms bring you to growth. reforms in education or in other aspects. These kind of reforms, I believe, are positive, and that we demand this kind of reforms is also positive. And I didn't defend these austerity reforms that had dramatic effects, because in fact they lengthened a crisis that lasted very little in the US. In the US, basically, by 2010 they had recovered, and in Europe it lasted 3-4 more years, which was fully unnecessary, because what happens is that once it was doubted what was happening in Greece and the euro by some of the northern countries, we had a second financial crisis that was even worse than the first. So that's not what I was defending, but I believe it's key. My idea that we have the baby is the reform, and we're not using the water adequately is linked to all the erroneous idea of just cutting budgets, as Gaines has taught us, and the anti-cyclic politics that we've had in the world and in Europe is fantastic, and it needs to exist. But what we cannot do is just to say that the reforms have not to be made. They have to be put in place so that we make sure that we have growth. Spain hasn't grown in productivity since 1995, and in Italy it's not that they haven't grown. What hasn't grown has the GDP since the year 95. So we really have to bear this in mind. It's there's no growth. For example, what Draghi is doing in the court changes or legal changes is also very interesting. In Spain, whoever is insolvent, they have to confront debt with all their assets from the future and the past. So you will be affected forever. We need to correct this. So there are several things that in our educational, labor system and industrial system do not work. And that's what I make reference to when I speak about reforms. I always have in mind precariousness and employment for the young, and three things that should concern us. The youth unemployment is one of the highest in Europe. Also, young people are abandoning schools, and we have one of the highest rates. And precariousness for the youth is also an important problem, and something we should solve with reforms.
Yes, thank you. My question is in line with the question of Mr. Costello. The time has changed and so on with the recovery fund, but so far I know, I have the impression that what the European Commission name as reform is always the same old things. Less public employment, less social expenses, more labor market liberalization. If I am wrong, I would like to know what is the Commission expecting as reform from the countries that receive this money? What type of reforms? And the second question to him is, he said before, the actual fiscal rules cannot work anymore, but we want to have the fiscal rule in place in 2023. 2023 is tomorrow. At what time will the Commission make new proposal for new fiscal rules, and how will it be discussed and when?
A moment, Declan. I would like also Manuel de la Rocha to answer that question, because he he mentioned the change in the paradigm, no? So, Declan first, Manuel, si no te importa, luego me gustaría que también contestaras. Gracias.
Okay, in terms of which reforms are requested of member states, I mean, essentially these are the reforms which were included in the recommendations issued to countries under the European semester. Now, some of them you could say are the same old reforms, but many of these are very, are tackling very long-standing structural problems facing our member states. And I don't think they go in one direction. I'm not aware of any recommendation to downsize the public sector. This I don't know. I'm not aware of any recommendation. And if I take a reform in the labor market, it's not, liberalization, if you look at what's proposed or what's in the Spanish plan, this is about, I mean, there's the most critical reform is the reform on the, to address the issue of the segregation or the dual labor market, and to reduce the number of contract types down to 3 main types of contracts. This would be, and the idea would be to shift the emphasis away from temporary employment towards more open-ended or permanent types of contracts. And this has been the biggest scourge of the Spanish labor market for decades. And it has mostly had a negative impact on young people. It has led to precarious employment, which is bad from a social point of view, but it's also been extremely damaging in terms of investment in human capital. So I think the reforms are really trying to get at the core of what is the problem, the critical problems. And I think it's a very balanced set of reforms, which it wasn't the Commission which proposed it, it was Spain which proposed it. And I think we support it. We obviously want to see that it gets the right balance, that it has the right incentives to ensure that employment can continue to grow whilst addressing these issues of precariousness. Now, in terms of the fiscal rules, indeed, it would be good to have a consensus on the framework by the time the full application kicks back in 2023. That would be the ideal situation. In reality, in order to make fundamental changes to the fiscal rules, the legislation would need to change. And that changing the legislation is something which could take a considerable amount of time. It requires a consensus in the Council, but also a co-decision with the European Parliament. So it may be the case that we need to make a progressive series of changes. First, making choices or interpretation within the existing set of rules, and then over time making changes to the legislation. We will restart the debate in autumn. I don't know when the Commission will make formal proposals for change. That will depend on how quickly a consensus can emerge, with our member states in the Council. Obviously, the European Parliament would need to be brought on board. But ideally, you would want some sort of indication of where we would go by the middle of next year, by the middle of 2022, so that member states could start to take that on board when they frame their budgets, when they prepare their budget for 2023. Thank you.
Manuel.
Sí, muchas gracias, Alicia. Vamos a ver, en relación un poco a la dirección de las reformas y en lo que tiene que ver con el
on the one hand, we have the regulation that states that the recovery plans are going to have to meet the specific recommendations issued by the European Commission, most particularly between the year 2019 and 2020. We could say that on the one hand, these reforms are recommendations that have a biological recommendation, and these reforms are general reforms, and that not in detail, and they do not talk only about fiscal sustainability, but also climate issues and social issues. For example, the Commission insisted on the aspect related to reinforce the minimum wage and to have a coherent framework related with the support or policies oriented to solve the children poverty and protect the most vulnerable. And I think we are going to have a certain number of reforms that are going to give greater coherence to what is the minimum wage, the fiscal or tax policies, support to families and children, and related to climate sustainability, we also had a lot of requirement. I think it is too simple or too easy to say these are the typical reforms, neoliberal or not. In the three aspects you have mentioned, the tasks, job market, employment market, and pensions and subsidies, one of the issues presented and put on the table by the Spanish government was that, first of all, in the recovery plan, the reform had to take on board the social items. So this government has put the social dialogue on the forefront, because our government is convinced of the fact that in the job field, when the agreements are met, they are more balanced, and the Commission understood that it was very important for us, and therefore, unlike other countries, the social partners are going to negotiate. Of course, the Commission insisted on the fact that we had the responsibility that if this reform wasn't met and the social agents or players did not meet their requirements, the requirements wouldn't be met, and the government should assume its responsibility. But it was important for us at the beginning. We had to explain it in detail, and this aspect wasn't clear enough. In the employment field, the approach was presented from the very beginning by the government. Priority is to address the sustainability of the youth employment, subcontracting, and also the fact of having on the table a certain number of flexibility, recruitment flexibility, and we have learned a lot about that during the pandemic. And also, we have to update a certain number of these employment policy that are not working. So this is the major package. We hope that we will address the structural issues of our labor market. In this sphere of the subsidies and pensions, on the basis of the reforms, we should have what was agreed upon by the Commission and through the Toledo Pact. The reforms that are not sustainable won't be addressed by this government, and they will be reversed. So the package of 8 reforms in the pensions field stems from the agreement that was reached in the Toledo Pact. In the fiscal field, I think we cannot talk about cuts and cutting down. The Commission was putting forward the fact that we have to ensure the sustainability of the public policies, but the Commission did not say that we had to say that increasing resources or through different cuts. What we have introduced, and here the government was quite clear about that, we have to propose an expert commission for them to have a reform, and the commission demanded us that the commission should not in the end say we have to increase the expenses, and this had to have a certain coherence. So we will wait to see what these experts say, and then we will assume the great majority of their orientation, and we will take them to the Parliament as a law. But we have to ensure sufficiency, sustainability, fiscal sustainability. Of course, we have to cut down the deficit, and we also have to impose a certain number of fiscal reforms. The other sphere where we have been very present is the efficiency of the public expenses. The Commission never wanted to cut down expenses, but they really want to reinforce efficiency in the assessment of the public expenses. If we have an interesting tool with these spending reviews, we have to go deeper into the improvement of the public expenses, and I think that the government should agree upon the fact that we have to improve the inputs, but also we have to improve the efficiency of the task. And this is the fiscal package. But I think we cannot say that the recommendations issued by the commissions were on the line of cutting down expenses and liberalization. What has come out of all that, what is public, is a fiscal package which is quite balanced, and it is aimed at the will of the government, and hasn't been imposed by the Commission. That's why I just wanted to give you the floor. Is that you have said it is the Spanish government that has proposed this. I've got a question, sent one for Manuel and another one for Luis and Declan. It is the member of the Senate, Luque Echevarria, that considers if the government considers the industry package are the funds enough given to the industry. For Declan and Luis, another question: don't you believe that some of the plans are meeting more the objective of the recovery more than the transformation objective? The answer is quite simple. It is not correct that the plan in Spain is going to give 3 billion to the industry, and if it is enough or not. There is yes, of course, there is 3 billion, and this is the component for industry, but this is not all the money that is going to be given to industry, because we have to add to that 1.5 billion for the green hydrogen development. All the value chain is going to be changed to meet a certain number of conditions and competences and industrial competences throughout the whole value chain of the green hydrogen and the component of renewable energies that are very much industrial. That is to say, to have more industrial capacity, and the renewable energies are going to be very much present in the industry field. There is also 24 billion that are there to bring a certain number of technological capacities. Though how can we have these technological capacities and create jobs in Spain? And this is going to strengthen our production fabric. And also there are elements that are closely linked to water resources, and so they say there are only 3 billion for industry, but maybe he hasn't read all the plan, all the draft, all the plan. He has only read the titles of the paragraphs, and I think if he reads in detail this plan, shows that there is more money, more funds are given to sustainability and in relation to the digitalization, and this is going to give a greater impact. And this is the objective of this government, in a way. Luis? I share the criticism of the member of the senator of the PNV, Uribe Echeverria. There was an ambiguity from the very beginning, because this plan wants to sustain the private sphere, the public and private sphere in the same way. It has to be a good policy, but at the same time, the text of the regulation and the real objective is the transformation. And I think that these both things are different. What we, of course, what would we could all make holes in the floor, but this wouldn't bring us more money. But I think that this plan is not very consistent in the private sphere. But we have 6 billion for the a renewal of housing, and of the 6 billion of which is other components, as to say vehicles and cars, to buy electrical cars and all that. But the electrical vehicle, and I see that there's a lot of investment in consumption goods, in sustainable consumption goods. These are, but there is little investment in 2 things. In human resources, we should invest more in human resources, training, occupational training, etc. And also we should invest more in the transformation of industry capabilities. I share with this member of the Senate, I share with him this great concern. We will have an economy where we will have electrical cars, but we won't have an industry ready for this transformation. I share this concern with him, of course. One last question, and we get from the regional minister. What can we say about the participation of regions in the management of the funds, and what would be the articulation of the dialogue with the government? And we have to close the session there. I will be very brief. The roadmap has been defined by the Spanish government, has been negotiating with the European Commission, has articulated a good co-governance with the regional communities, with the autonomous communities, and I congratulate the Spanish government for that. The funds are given to the different territories. We are having a certain number of controls, and from the beginning we have been told what was the deadline for the implementation of the European funds. both for the REACT mechanism and the PMRR, and we had to meet a certain number of milestones, objectives, and of course, according to these objectives, we would have the money, the funds. But also the Spanish government told us we had to present a mature project in line with the 4 strategic axes established by Europe. And these are at the basis of Spain can, and without forgetting the training of the staff for these digital competences, the green transition to go towards the green economy, the social cohesion, and I add something else, which is try to meet the territorial cohesion and trying to identify a certain number of opportunities in the territory and to articulate the European projects towards the territory, and also having the equal opportunities, and also the gender equality is a priority for women, those living in areas where they haven't all the opportunities and the tools. The explanation was quite simple. Some have understood it and some others not. But the project should be, in the first place, sustainable from an economic point of view. And so, therefore, all this is not new. Those who are those who use European funds, this is quite normal. The Commission, in the relationship with the Spanish government and the Spanish government as a management authority, it is a way of working and of working. It has been mentioned, of course, we have to make a certain number of reforms, and so we are waiting for the funds to get to the regions. Our projects in Cantabria are on the table already, and they are mature. We are eager to manage all that. Thank you, Regional Minister. We have no more time. I'm sorry, we have to close. I'm sorry for those who haven't had the time to answer or to make questions. I would like, before closing the session, thank you to all of you, but I would like to thank the speakers. It has been really enriching. Thank you, Manuel de la Rocha, Luis Garicano, Declan Costello. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you to the regional minister, and I think next year we will have to talk more to see how we are going to address this great milestone for Spain and for the European Union. Thank you very much. Thanks so much.